Go live. Okay, we're live.
Hello, my name is Peyton and I am in the affirmative for the United States should recognize felon voting rights.
And I'm Laila. I'm on the negative. Go ahead, Peyton.
Currently, many states across the U.S. do not allow felon voting rights. It has been common practice in the United States to make felons ineligible to vote, in some cases permanently. Over the last few decades, the general trend has been toward reinstating the right to vote at some point, although this is a state-by-state policy choice. I believe, and you will too, that the United States should recognize felon voting rights. The first thing I would like to discuss is the idea of trust and trusting a felon's judgment. Many people would say that you can't trust a criminal, but according to Steve Chapman from Chicago Tribune, we let ex-convicts marry, reproduce, buy beer, own property, and drive. They don't lose their freedom of religion, their right against self-incrimination, or their right not to have soldiers quartered in their homes in time of war. But in many places, the assumption is that they can't be trusted to help choose our leaders. If we thought criminals could never be reformed, we wouldn't let them out of prison in the first place. Is he correct in saying this? Absolutely. If we can trust them to be back outside and continue living their lives, then they should be allowed to vote every 4 years with the rest of Americans. According to the National Conference of State Legislators, each state has a varying approach to felon disenfranchisement. They are able to split this up into 4 categories. In our first category, we have 3 states, where felons never lose their right to vote, even while they are incarcerated. In our second category, 19 states follow the law that felons lose their voting rights only while incarcerated and receive automatic restoration upon release. In the third category, 18 states allow their felons to lose their voting rights during incarceration and for a period of time after, typically while on parole and/or on probation. And our last and final category states that felons lose their voting rights indefinitely for some crimes or require a governor's pardon in order for voting rights to be restored, to face an additional waiting period after completion of a sentence. Now, our last category is a great way to solve the issue of felon voting rights by requiring a governor's pardon for the felon's voting rights to be restored. We can ensure that we can now trust them with voting. Our second advantage we are going to look at is the idea of felon voting rights creating more equality for those people. Felons who are unable to vote still have to pay taxes. If they don't get to participate in our political decision, why should they have to follow them? Erlen Woods, co-host of the Pulitzer Prize-nominated podcast, and an advocate for ex-felons who are working to return to life after incarceration or to society, wrote, "I do pay taxes, so for me, it was more of taxation without representation." Woods said, "So I definitely want to get involved in the process." According to J.D. Pamela S. Carlin, a professor of law at Stanford University, the Eighth Amendment succinctly prohibits excessive sanctions and demands that punishment for crime should be graduated and proportioned to the offense. Thus, the states that continue to exclude all felons permanently are outliers, both within the United States and in the world. By following our Bill of Rights, we can ensure more equality with voting rights and can listen to discrimination against felons. Thank you.
Okay. So, cross-examination affirmative. Okay. What makes you believe their judgment after they have been incarcerated, after not following the law? What makes you think that they deserve, or do you really feel that they deserve the right to vote?
I mean, if they have the right to be released out of prison or whatever they're at and go on to live their lives and follow all the rules that the rest of society has to follow, then they should at least be able to vote. Like if they have to go along with all the other things. They're trustworthy enough to follow through with all those others.
And do you feel that some people who are incarcerated and that don't get the right to vote, would you say that sometimes it's like an act of racial discrimination?
I would say it is similar to it, an act of racial discrimination, if they aren't, like, if I'm understanding your question correctly, they aren't, it is discrimination, just like racial discrimination, just because, like, it is, they are kind of that outcast, just like racial discrimination. And so by us not allowing them to vote is kind of that same incentive. That kind of makes sense.
You think it is unconstitutional to not let them vote?
Yes. I mean, just like I said with the Eighth Amendment, it is unconstitutional just because it is like our rule to allow everybody to vote that is following through in our society and becoming a citizen. So,
yeah. Got it. Okay, that's all the questions I have for you.
Hey.
Okay, now for my negative. So if you are not willing to follow the law, then you should not have a role in making the law for everyone else, which is what you do when you vote, either directly or indirectly. It is not a legitimate government objective for elected officials to fine-tune the quality of the electorate. That would mean that not only criminals, but also children, non-citizens, and the mentally incompetent must be allowed to vote. In fact, we do not have certain minimums, objective standards, or of responsibility and commitment to our laws that we require people to meet before they are given a role in the solemn enterprise of self-government. People who have committed serious crimes against their fellow citizens don't meet those standards. And those crimes can include such nonviolent felonies as, say, treason or espionage or voter fraud and public corruption. White-collar crime and felonies merely concerning drugs like trafficking in fentanyl, lace, heroin, and selling it to minors, for example. We agree, we know nobody who doesn't agree that we must facilitate the re-entry into society of released prisoners who are not improved by the experience of incarceration. But it is precisely because such a high percentage of criminals who are released are so unimproved that they find their way back into prison, that it makes sense to wait some period of time, just like Florida does, to make sure that the felon really has turned over a new leaf. We don't let children vote, for instance, or non-citizens. Why? Because we don't trust them and their judgment. So the question is, do criminals belong in that category? I think the answer is clearly yes. People who commit serious crimes have shown that they are not trustworthy. For those who may suggest that these rule changes have anything to do with race, these assertions are completely unfounded. Justice has nothing to do with race. In a recent case, the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals examined the historical record and soundly rejected the argument that Florida's prohibition on felon voting was originally motivated by racial discrimination. There are persuasive reasons to believe that Congress did not intend to include felon disenfranchisement provisions within the coverage of the Voting Rights Act, and we must therefore look beyond the plain text of the statute in construing the reach of its provisions. We therefore conclude that the Voting Rights Act was not intended to, and thus does not, encompass felon provisions. Unlike any other voting qualification, felon laws are explicitly endorsed by the text of the 14th Amendment. They are constitutional. Only a narrow subset of them, those enacted with an racial discriminatory purpose, is unconstitutional. Felon rights should not be allowed. That's all I have. Hold on, I think you're cutting out. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Whoops, okay. My first question is, if you mentioned that children aren't trustworthy, and that is similar to a criminal or a felon not being trustworthy. But if they are trusted enough to be let out, then does that change the circumstances? I understand like a felon that is currently in prison isn't trustworthy, but if they had just been let out and aren't considered a felon any longer, but like or a criminal any longer, would that change the circumstances of trust?
I think it would not, just because getting out of prison and starting a new life is kind of like a child, like you're learning just how to live your life, and that's taking out of prison, so you don't really have that experience in the political world or just law-based or really what your society is, because you spent so much time in prison. So you really shouldn't be given the right to vote until you are able to do so.
Okay. At the same time, though, like, we do have children that are smarter than some adults who are currently voting, but who are not felons. So is there exceptions for certain felons? Are they, like, let's say a felon is smarter than, or smart enough, intelligent enough, and trustworthy, then is that an exception? Or are we just going to be saying
I
altogether?
think once a crime is committed, you really can't take it back. So once you're a felon, it's on your record forever. And I think sometimes motives don't change, so that could go hand in hand with the law. So
Okay, that's what I got. Okay, so for my affirmative rebuttal, I would like to say that overall, whether you agree to felon voting rights or not, there will not be much of an impact on you as a citizen. By supporting that the United States should recognize felon voting rights, you are only helping out others. A trust can be built, as it is there already, when they are released to live their lives once again, and you will be a part of maintaining more equality in your country.
all right. Okay, and then my negative rebuttal in summary. So trying to think. I mean, just like I said before, it's the same argument that allowing people in prison to vote would kind of be a distrust of our government and the law, that if you're going to distrust the law in the first place, how would we know that you are not trying to backfire at the law and creating just a more dangerous political scene for the society around you? And just like I said before, if we're not letting children vote or the mentally incompetent vote, then we really shouldn't let criminals vote. And there should be a standard that is set when people are voting, especially when it comes to felons, because once your record is shown that you are distrustworthy, then your voting rights should be taken away. And I don't think that is unconstitutional. I think it is protecting the Constitution in a sense, that we should only be letting people who follow the law actually have the right to vote. And people, like I said, people who commit serious crimes have through and through shown that they are not trustworthy, and so they should not be given the right to vote. Yeah, that's all I have. Okay.
Then, for my affirmative summary, I believe that, Ronald F. McDonald, the former governor of Virginia, once said, "I believe that the commission of a crime must have a tough and just consequence. I also believe that once an offender has fully paid his debt to society, he deserves a second chance. It is a mark of good government to restore felons' rights and provide them with the opportunity to succeed and become law-abiding citizens again. The United States of America has become a second chance for many people, a second chance at a better life. Do the right thing and think about a second chance for felons, and agree to the fact that the United States should recognize felon voting rights." Thank you.
All right. I'm going to end the broadcast.